Chapter 19. The Sandwich Islanders, hide curing, wood cutting, rattlesnakes, newcomers. Here was a change in my life as complete as it had been sudden. In the twinkling of an eye, I was transformed from a sailor into a beachcomber and a hide curer. Yet the novelty and the comparative independence of the life were not unpleasant. Our hide house was a large building made of rough boards and intended to hold 40,000 hides. In one corner of it, a small room was parted off in which 4 berths were made where we were to live, with Mother Earth for our floor. It contained a table, a small locker for pots, spoons, plates, etc., and a small hole cut to let in the light. Here we put our chests, threw our bedding into the berths, and took up our quarters. Over our head was another small room in which Mr. Russell lived, who had charge of the hide house, the same man who was for a time an officer of the Pilgrim. There he lived in solitary grandeur, eating and sleeping alone, and these were his principal occupations, and communing with his own dignity. The boy was to act as cook, while myself, a giant of a Frenchman named Nicholas, and 4 Sandwich Islanders were to cure the hides. Sam, the Frenchman, and myself lived together in the room, and the 4 Sandwich Islanders worked and ate with us, but generally slept at the oven. My new messmate, Nicholas, was the most immense man that I had ever seen in my life. He came on the coast in a vessel which was afterwards wrecked, and now let himself out to the different houses to cure hides. He was considerably over 6 feet and of a frame so large that he might have been shown for a curiosity. But the most remarkable thing about him was his feet. They were so large that he could not find a pair of shoes in California to fit him, and was obliged to send to Oahu for a pair, and when he got them, he was compelled to wear them down at the heel. He told me once himself that he was wrecked in an American brig on the Goodwin Sands and was sent up to London to the charge of the American consul, without clothing to his back or shoes to his feet, and was obliged to go about London streets in his stocking feet 3 or 4 days in the month of January until the consul could have a pair of shoes made for him. His strength was in proportion to his size, and his ignorance to his strength. Strong as an ox and ignorant as strong. He neither knew how to read nor write. He had been to sea from a boy and had seen all kinds of service and been in every kind of vessel. Merchantmen, men of war, privateers, and slavers, and from what I could gather from his accounts of himself, and from what he once told me in confidence after we had become better acquainted, he had even been in worse business than slave trading. He was once tried for his life in Charleston, South Carolina, and though acquitted, yet he was so frightened that he never would show himself in the United States again. And I could not persuade him that he could never be tried a second time for the same offense. He said he had got safe off from the breakers and was too good a sailor to risk his timbers again. Though I knew what his life had been, yet I never had the slightest fear of him. We always got along very well together, and though so much stronger and larger than I, he showed a respect for my education and for what he had heard of my situation before coming to sea. "I'll be good friends with you," he used to say, "for by and by you'll come out here captain, and then you'll haze me well." By holding well together, we kept the officer in good order, for he was evidently afraid of Nicholas and never ordered us except when employed upon the hides. My other companions, the Sandwich Islanders, deserve particular notice. There's some show-off pelicans. A considerable trade has been carried on for several years between California and the Sandwich Islands, and most of the vessels are manned with islanders, who, as they, for the most part, sign no articles, leave whenever they choose, and let themselves out to cure hides at San Diego, and to supply the places of the men of the American vessels while on the coast. In this way, quite a colony of them had become settled at San Diego as their headquarters. Some of these had recently gone off in the Ayacucho and Loriot, and the Pilgrim had taken Mr. Manini and 3 others, so that there were not more than 20 left. Of these, 4 were on pay at the Ayacucho's house. 4 more were working with us, and the rest were living at the oven in a quiet way. For their money was nearly gone, and they must make it last until some other vessel came down to employ them. During the 4 months that I lived here, I got well acquainted with all of them and took the greatest pains to become familiar with their language, habits, and characters. Their language I could only learn orally, for they had not any books among them, though many of them had been taught to read and write by the missionaries at home. They spoke a little English, and by a sort of compromise, a mixed language that was used on the beach, which could be understood by all. The long name of Sandwich Islanders is dropped, and they are called by the whites all over the Pacific Ocean Kanakas, from a word in their own language which they apply to themselves, and to all South Sea Islanders, in distinction from whites, whom they call Heo. This name Kanaka they answer to, both collectively and individually. Their proper names, in their own language, being difficult to pronounce and remember, they are called by any names which the captains or crews may choose to give them. Some are called after the vessel they are in, others by common names as Jack, Tom, Bill, and some have fancy names as Banyan, Foretop, Rope Yarn, Pelican, etc., etc. Of the 4 who worked at our house, one was named Mr. Bingham, after the missionary at Oahu. Another, Hope, after a vessel that he had been in. A third, Tom Davis, the name of his first captain, and the 4th, Pelican, from his fancied resemblance to that bird. Then there was Lagoda Jack, California Bill, etc., etc. But by whatever names they might be called, they were the most interesting, intelligent, and kind-hearted people that I ever fell in with. I felt a positive attachment for almost all of them, and many of them I have to this time a feeling for, which would lead me to go a great way for the mere pleasure of seeing them, and which will always make me feel a strong interest in the mere name of a Sandwich Islander. Tom Davis knew how to read, write, and cipher in common arithmetic, had been to the United States, and spoke English quite well. His education was as good as that of 3/4 of the Yankees in California, and his manners and principles a good deal better, and he was so quick of apprehension that he might have been taught navigation and the elements of many of the sciences with the most perfect ease. Old Mr. Bingham spoke very little English, almost none, and neither knew how to read nor write, but he was the best-hearted old fellow in the world. He must have been over 50 years of age and had 2 of his front teeth knocked out, which was done by his parents as a sign of grief at the death of Kamehameha, the great king of the Sandwich Islands. We used to tell him that he ate Captain Cook and lost his teeth in that way. That was the only thing that ever made him angry. He would always be quite excited at that and say, "Eol, no. Me no eat Captain Cook. Me pickaninny, small, so high, no more. My father see Captain Cook. Me, no." None of them liked to have anything said about Captain Cook, for the sailors all believed that he was eaten and that they cannot endure to be taunted with. New Zealand Kanaka eat white man. Sandwich Island Kanaka, no. Sandwich Island Kanaka, you are like Punahoel. Al Isema you. Mr. Bingham was a sort of patriarch among them and was always treated with great respect, though he had not the education and energy which gave Mr. Manini his power over them. I have spent hours in talking with this old fellow about Kamehameha, the Charlemagne of the Sandwich Islands. His son and successor, Riho Riho, who died in England and was brought to Oahu in the frigate Blonde, Captain Lord Byron, and whose funeral he remembered perfectly, and also about the customs of his country in his boyhood, and the changes which had been made by the missionaries. He never would allow that human beings had been eaten there, and indeed it always seemed like an insult to tell so affectionate, intelligent, and civilized a class of men that such barbarities had been practiced in their own country within the recollection of many of them. Certainly, the history of no people on the globe can show anything like so rapid an advance. I would have trusted my life and my fortune in the hands of any one of these people, and certainly had I wished for a favor or act of sacrifice, I would have gone to them all, in turn, before I should have applied to one of my own countrymen on the coast, and should have expected to have seen it done before my own countrymen had got half through counting the cost. Their costumes and manner of treating one another show a simple, primitive generosity, which is truly delightful and which is often a reproach to our own people. Whatever one has, they all have. Money, food, clothes, they share with one another, even to the last piece of tobacco to put in their pipes. I once heard old Mr. Bingham say with the highest indignation to a Yankee trader who was trying to persuade him to keep his money to himself, "No, we know all the same of you. Suppose one got money, all got money. You, suppose one got money, lock him up in chest. No good. Kanaka all the same a one." This principle they carry so far that none of them will eat anything in the sight of others without offering it all around. I have seen one of them break a biscuit which had been given him in 5 parts at a time when I knew he was on a very short allowance, as there was but little to eat on the beach. My favorite among all of them, and one who was liked by both officers and men, and by whomever he had anything to do with, was Hope. He was an intelligent, kind-hearted little fellow, and I never saw him angry, though I knew him for more than a year and have seen him imposed upon by white people and abused by insolent officers of vessels. He was always civil and always ready, and never forgot a benefit. I once took care of him when he was ill, getting medicines from the ship's chests, when no captain or officer would do anything for him, and he never forgot it. Every Kanaka has one particular friend, whom he considers himself bound to do everything for, and with whom he has a sort of contract, an alliance, offensive and defensive, and for whom he will often make the greatest sacrifices. This friend they call Aikane, and for such did Hope adopt me. I do not believe I could have wanted anything which he had that he would not have given me. In return for this, I was always his friend among the Americans and used to teach him letters and numbers, for he left home before he had learned how to read. He was very curious about Boston, as they call the United States. He was very curious about Boston, as they call the United States, asking many questions about the houses, the people, etc., and always wished to have the pictures and books explained to him. They were all astonishingly quick in question. They were all astonishingly quick in catching at explanations and many things which I had thought it utterly impossible to make them understand. They often seized in an instant and asked questions which showed that they knew enough to make them wish to go farther. The pictures of steamboats and railroad cars and the columns of some newspapers which I had gave me great difficulty to explain. The grading of the road, the rails, the construction of the carriages, they could easily understand. But the motion produced by steam was a little too refined for them. I attempted to show it to them once by an experiment upon the cook's coppers, but failed, probably as much from my own ignorance as from their want of apprehension. And I have no doubt left them with about as clear an idea of the principle as I had myself. This difficulty, of course, existed in the same force with the steamboats, and all I could do was to give them some account of the results in the shape of speed, for, failing in the reason, I had to fall back upon the fact. In my account of the speed, I was supported by Tom, who had been to Nantucket and seen a little steamboat which ran over to New Bedford.